Good morning, everyone. This morning's Bible reading is from Matthew 10. We're reading verses 1 to 15. It's about Jesus sending out the 12. Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who's called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James of Zebedee and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts, no bag for the journey or extra shirt or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Truly, I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town.
Miranda, thank you very much, and good morning to you. Lovely to see you. I've said to a couple of people this morning, it's so good to see you, I haven't seen you for a while. And they've said, well, we've been here, and absolutely correct, I've been away for a little while. We went to see Helen's family, and then I've been back, but actually not on the stage. Sarah has kindly organised for me to have a couple of weeks not on the stage back. So I think this is my first time speaking to you for quite a while. So it is lovely to see you, lovely to be sharing God's word with you this morning. And we are in Matthew chapter 10. Oh, and I guess if there's someone who doesn't know me, my name's Peter Scott. I serve as a senior pastor, so I look forward to meeting you afterwards. I think I know most of you. Matthew chapter 10. We're in a series in Matthew, and we're going to be looking at the first 15 verses. And the chapter begins, as we just heard from Miranda, with Jesus gathering his disciples, or at least 12 of them, the ones that we call the 12 disciples. And he gives them authority to drive out spirits, heal the sick. I want to put us in the place of imagining what that must have been like. To be in a place where Jesus says, right, you, and you, and you, and you, off you go and heal the sick and cast out demons. And maybe it's not a hypothetical question, because maybe, as we'll explore today, maybe that is actually something Jesus is calling us to do. I don't know, we'll talk about that. But just as I sit in that and I think, wow, that's big, that's significant, and I wonder what my reaction would have been if I'd been in that room with Jesus. Now, to be fair, those disciples sort of had a bit of a head start. They had a little bit of a different introduction to this. Last week, Sarah unpacked chapter 9 for us, and chapter 9 finished like this. It told us that Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. And it goes on to say that when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into the harvest fields. So the disciples have actually been wandering around with Jesus, seeing him do these things. They have been right there when he's done these amazing miracles of healing people, where he's cast demons out of people, where he's been proclaiming the kingdom. And so they've had this experience. But what's happening is that Jesus' ministry is growing. Crowds are coming to him. And he's seeing that, and he's spoken to them, and he said, look at all these crowds. My heart is for them. And what I need is help. I need you to start going out. And so in some ways, maybe it wasn't a surprise for them as they were in that room. And he said, okay, it's going to be your turn. The one thing that I find quite interesting in what Jesus asks them to do as he sends them out is what he didn't ask them to do. One of the things he doesn't ask them to do in there is to go out and teach. Isn't that fascinating? Jesus doesn't say anywhere in there, I want you to go out and teach people knowledge. I want you to go out and teach information. What he says is, I want you to go with my authority and do these things. Here is my authority, says Jesus, and what that's going to do is point people to my presence and my power rather than yours. Authority. So I started thinking, well, what is this authority thing? And I wanted to look at that a little bit more. What does that conjure up for you if you think about authority? Or maybe authorities is a bit easier. If I said to you, who are the authorities? Now, I think for me, it's probably, and maybe for you, it's the idea of maybe that's the police, maybe it's the government. It's sort of people who've been given some sort of power to either make laws or implement them. So there's some sort of power involved over me or over others. That's the authorities. And the other place that the word sort of is clear for me is the idea of at work, there is a sort of a chain of authority. I have a boss who has a boss. That's sort of how it works. And I wonder if it's the same for you. Or perhaps if you're in school, there's a sense of authority. There's a teacher who is the authority in the classroom. So there's often in spaces that we're in a sense of hierarchy or position. And so authority in some ways comes from that sort of defined positional hierarchy. But what about this authority? Is that what Jesus is talking about? I give you my authority. Is he changing the disciples' position? I wonder if he's talking more here about spiritual authority. About spiritual authority. And so that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about. What is spiritual authority? Well, that's this sense of having power over things in the spiritual realm. It comes from Jesus. Jesus has power in the spiritual realm. Is that available to us today? That's probably a good question. Now, many would say, yes, it is. This idea of spiritual authority, it's certainly available to us today. And I've been doing a little bit of reading by Rob Reimer. Sarah mentioned that his conference is coming up. And I've done some reading of some of his books. And he has some really fascinating stuff to say about spiritual authority. And a lot of it comes from experience around the world in this space. And he says this, he says that spiritual authority is not just positional. He says it is positional, but it's developmental. Let me explain those two things. So in the positional space, he's saying, yes, indeed, when we come to know Jesus, we are, it tells us, seated in the heavenly realms with him. Actually, our position does change. There is a different space that we're in positionally in the spiritual world. But also that there is an idea that we need to be able to develop where we are at spiritually. It's something that comes with use. We need to learn how to use it. And so perhaps sometimes I don't feel like I have spiritual authority. It exists, but we need to learn how to use it. And so then this is what Reimer says, and I've got a slide to summarise this about spiritual authority, and I found this really interesting and useful. We're going to sort of unpack this a little bit this morning. He says, okay, let me summarise, that spiritual authority is founded in identity, expanded in intimacy, and activated by faith. Founded in identity, expanded in intimacy, and activated by faith. Now let me try and explain what I think each of those things means, and then we'll look at this text that we've been reading as an example. So first of all, founded in identity, this is the idea of dying to ourselves. Who are we? Actually, we become in Christ different people. And rather than self being the center, our identity becomes one in and part of Jesus. That's where our true identity lies. And that, as we understand it and we start to get this foundational knowledge, allows us to move into an intimate space in that relationship. And as we grow in understanding of how much we're loved and cared for, as we spend time, that intimacy expands. And so does our authority in the spiritual realm. And as that happens, then we start to hear the invitation of Jesus to take steps of faith. Little ones at first, then maybe bigger ones. And that's where it's activated. The spiritual authority that we've been given becomes activated by faith. So we see that in this passage. Interestingly, in verse 2 of the passage we've been looking at, it's the only place in Matthew's gospel where this group of people are called apostles. Everywhere else they're disciples. But here they're called apostles, which means being sent out. So what's their identity? Well, they clearly know they are followers. And now their identity is becoming being sent out. So followers of Christ being sent out. Their intimacy with Jesus has been expanding. They've been walking around the dusty roads of Palestine. They've been seeing him do incredible miracles and talking to people, and then they say, hey, can you explain that to us? Because we didn't get it. And as they explore those things together, as they eat, sleep, walk, and travel, they get to know Jesus in a much deeper way. So that intimacy is developed. And here now we come to kind of a big step of activation of faith. Now, you would say there's already been a big step. When you are working in a profession and somebody comes along and says, hey, I want you to step out of that, come follow me permanently. That's a big step of faith. But here comes another one. You've been following me for a while. You've seen what I've been doing. You know that the harvest fields, the crowds are there. I want to send you out with my authority. Here is an activation step. What I want to do is show you about 4-minute clip from The Chosen. Now, many of you know that I'm a big fan of this TV series. I think it brings the Bible to life in different ways. And so we're just going to watch this. For those of you who are joining us online, we've had experience where even though we have a license to show this, unfortunately YouTube doesn't necessarily pick that up, so it will kill the live stream. So we're probably going to pop a slide up for you, but we will be back in 4.5 minutes. So stay tuned. But for those in the room, let's have a look at how The Chosen sort of portrays this moment in Jesus' ministry. What do you think? Why don't you just turn to the person next to you and just share your thoughts on what you've just seen for 30 seconds? And hopefully welcome back to our live stream people. All right, I'll call you back. I know there's lots and lots to discuss. I just wanted to get the juices flowing. By the way, that's from season 3, episode 2, if you're interested in which part of The Chosen that comes from. I love it. I love it because it just brings all of these things that I think, well, that's kind of how I would have been. I love the way Jesus pauses because they're all going, sort of mouths wide open. What's going on here? I like the questions. Well, how soon? Did I miss the training session? No, this is it. There's just so, it brings so much reality to it. And it must have been something like that. Of course, this is a 21st century rendition, but it just feels like it could have been something like that. And I particularly love the gentle but firm guidance of Jesus. He knows how they were going to react. He knows how you and I react. And yet he says, yeah. And yeah, and I'm with you. So, I want to talk about this passage now. We've sort of looked at it. We've talked a little bit about spiritual authority. We've seen one take, I guess, on what it could have looked like. And now I want to talk about the idea that we are sent out into the harvest fields as well. Now, over the last few years, we've used a phrase, we've talked about ourselves a little bit as a salt factory. And let me just remind you what that has meant. The idea that salt is something that can both preserve, so it can help things from decaying, but it also brings taste and flavour and life. And we've talked about the idea of us as Christ followers being salt for the world around us, the world that we're in. And we're a factory because this is a place where actually we want to be producing that salt. Not just in us, but in anyone else who comes here as well. And then we get to send that salt out. So a factory produces it and out it goes, so it goes to be useful out somewhere else. So that idea of us bringing the life of Jesus, and just as in this portrayal, in this passage, he asks us, he invites us to go out. And so what I wanted to do in that sort of spirit was take a look at what were the instructions that Jesus gave in this passage. We just want to go through them sort of piece by piece. And so the first instruction was to go only to the people of Israel and not to the Gentiles. So this is Matthew 10, verse 5 and 6. And we heard it in the portrayal online on the video as well. Now that was the initial mission of Jesus and his disciples. And we also know that when Jesus rose again, the last thing he talked to his disciples about was, now it's time to go to the ends of the earth. That remit got broadened. So whilst this passage says, this is the mission field for now for you, for us, it's a much broader mission field. And so I want to suggest that in some ways we take both of those things. On the one hand, our mission field is the whole world, but also I suspect that for each of us and for us as a community, there's a particular mission field. And for you, that might be the people that you do school with, the people that you study with, your colleagues, your neighbours, your family, your friends. And so on the one hand, it's broad, but on the other also, I think God has a specific calling for each of us and for us collectively as a community to go out to this mission field, this harvest field. The next series of instructions that we find in verse 7 and 8 is to proclaim the kingdom of heaven is at hand, heal the sick and cast out demons. And as we saw, I think that's kind of accurate. Even though they'd been watching, they were still probably going, hang on, Lord, we've been watching you do this, but you want me to go and do that now? Perhaps it's even harder for us. Now, this is a journey that I've been on, and the question of should we be giving that a go today? And so what we've done, actually, if you've been around this church over the last 6 months, we have talked about healing the sick. We had a healing service. And we've talked about the concept of the spiritual world and demonization. And so we're starting to take little steps. I'm starting to take little steps in this direction, in line with my faith being activated. So I think this is a space for us as a community to continue to consider, what is God calling you and I and us into? Proclaiming the kingdom seems in some ways the easiest of those three. Are we called to do them all? Let me move to verse 9 and 10. The radical way of going about mission. If you read commentaries and scholars, they actually, and I think The Chosen often draws on good commentary and good scholars. And what we saw in that portrayal is indeed what you read in the commentary. The idea of why would Jesus have said to them, don't take a staff and don't take anything really to keep you alive. Don't take a whole lot of food, don't take spare money. And those things are critical, of course. When you're walking around a place where there could be robbers, could be danger, you want to have something to protect yourself. When you're going to another village that's multiple days' walk away, you want to be sure of your food. So what was Jesus saying there? Why did he give those instructions? And I think there are two things that come out of that for us if we read into it in a 21st century context where we are unlikely to walk to the next village, even when you need extra steps. I think Jesus was saying, you need to trust in me. In this mission that I'm sending you on, I will provide. And that looks very different for us in the 21st century. But the principle of trusting in provision is the first thing. And the second thing is differentiation. Differentiation. And what Jesus was saying up here and in the commentaries on what was happening at that time was that there were people walking around dispensing kind of good advice, but hoping to get paid for it. And the idea that actually we could also be a community like that. Hey, we're part of this community that is actually really good self-help. And if you do some of these things, you behave well, your life will be better. That'll be $20, thank you very much. This idea that there's sort of a transaction. And Jesus says, no. On this mission I'm sending you on, I will provide for you. Freely you have been given everything you need. Freely you are given love and grace. And so freely you're to give. And I think that's the principle that we read here in verses 9 and 10. Now, the final part of the passage that we're looking at this morning gives instructions for connecting with the people we come across. So as we go on our mission, what are the instructions? And part of it, although the phrase wasn't used in this gospel, is the idea of people of peace. That we will come across people who are actually open to what we've got to say. And the reason they're open is because God is already at work. So that as we go into our school, into our workplace, to our neighbours, to our families, God is already at work before us. We're not sort of breaking completely new ground. We're actually on his mission. And so we recognise people of peace where they're interested in relationship with us. And therefore, they'll be interested in hearing what we have to say. And that's a place where it's fertile ground for us to talk to people. Now, of course, in the culture the disciples were in, it was a little bit different. They had a significant emphasis on hospitality. And so their expectation would have been that many places they went to would have hosted them and been friendly to them and said, yes, look, stay here as long as you like. For us, perhaps that's, does your neighbour ever invite you over for a barbecue? Or do you invite them? Is there somebody at work that has lunch with you periodically? Or quite often? You're always sitting with them at lunchtime. Those are sort of people that might be people of peace. And that I think we're invited as followers of Jesus to say, is that part of the harvest field, Lord? So in both the sent out disciples case and in our case, I think there's this interesting mix of unfamiliar territory and peace that we go in. They would have gone to a place that they probably didn't know the people there. So in that sense, it's unfamiliar. And yet at the same time, there's a sense of there will be peace on this journey. I think that we're called into that same space. The last thing I want to talk about in this passage before we close and move into our next song, and we're going to do communion today, which will be great, is ask this question. And this is a good question to ask every time you read the Bible. What does this tell me about Jesus? What do we actually learn about Jesus in this passage? And for me, I think there are a number of things, but the one I want to focus on is Jesus' love for the lost. He looks out at the crowd and he says, I love these people, but I can see they're in pain and I want to help them. That's his heart. That's why he came. That's why he died, for us and everybody. That's the beating heart of God. And so I think in this passage we see that he wants to invite us into that. And part of being a follower is not just getting a set of instructions, but there's something deeper going on. This thing that we've been freely given, which is the opportunity for relationship with God. Jesus knows that actually part of that will grow as we begin to share it. As our intimacy expands, as we take that step of faith, that's actually good for us, but it's also we're invited on the mission so that others come into that same relationship. I think that's what we see about Jesus, his deep heart for all of us. And I think we see that right throughout the New Testament. The call for us to go and make disciples, to proclaim the good news, and that we go in his authority. So I'll finish there. I'd love to invite you to pray with me as we do. Our Lord Jesus, thank you for calling us and calling us by name. And as you invite us, to follow you, I just pray, Lord, that you would help us to be open to expanding our intimacy with you, spending time with you, knowing that our identity is rooted in who you are as we give ourselves up for more of you. And would you give us courage to take risks in our faith, to take steps forward and trust that you are there, to listen to your calling into a space of sharing you with others. Help us develop this spiritual authority as we step into the work you have for us, that your kingdom may come and your will be done on earth as in heaven. Amen.